All right, now that everything's up and running, YouTube Live ready to go, um, I want to go ahead and welcome everyone into the very first webinar for 2024 in the Plantae webinar series. My name is Jason Padilla, and I'm your technical host for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you by the Plantae, the open community, online community for plant scientists, powered by the American Society of Plant Biologists. I would like to give a special shout out and a special thank you to members, ASPB members who are attending today. Your ASPB membership dues help support making this webinar possible. For any of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today and get the discount code %10 to receive the 10% off discount on your registration. ASPB members get early access to this webinar. And you can learn more about ASPB and opportunity we provide at aspb.org. Next slide. As a heads up, this webinar is recorded, and so all of our webinars are posted on our YouTube channel. If you check out our Plantae YouTube channel, you'll be able to find many other exciting talks that we've done over the years. And so if you're looking for some awesome webinar with interesting topic around plant science, feel free to check it out. And next slide. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a quick housekeeping items to make sure that you get the most out of attending today's webinar. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please let me know about those using the chat box, or you can email me at jpadilla@aspb.org. You have questions. If you have questions for our guest speakers, please add them in the Zoom Q&A section, and our moderators will be sharing them with us, our presenters. And then finally, if you are having technical difficulties and need to leave the webinar early, as I mentioned, we are recording this webinar, and you can watch it later on our YouTube channel. And so be sure to follow the YouTube channel to receive notification when new content is posted. And so without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to our moderators for today's webinar. Plantae Fellows, take it away.
Thank you, Jesse. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, anywhere you are in the world. My name is Idowu, and you are welcome to a Plantae webinar on artificial intelligence and machine learning in plant science. With me are speakers from different parts of the world. And one of the speakers, the first person I will mention is Dr. Mose, who is from the University of Guelph in Canada. Dr. Alexander White from the Smithsonian Institution in USA, Professor Sabina Leonani from University of Exeter in UK, and Professor Von Dijk at Wageningen University in Netherlands. Next slide, please. Okay. So for the outline of our webinar, we'll be having speakers' introduction, which I've just done, and we'll introduce our moderators also, and then topic introduction, which will be taken by one of the moderator, and panel discussion, and then the Q&A session. Next slide, please. So our first speaker, which I'll be introduced, is Dr. Mose. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Dr. Mose Yusfeda is a research associate and special graduate faculty which specializes in plant breeding and computational biology, and is a special graduate faculty at the University of Guelph. Our next speaker is Professor Sabina, who is a professor of philosophy and history of science at University of Exeter. Yes. And the next speaker is
Okay, it seems like we have lost connection to Iru, so I will just quickly take over while she can quickly reconnect. So our third speaker of today is Dr. Alexander White, who is a researcher at the Smithsonian Institute, where he is a data scientist that is using machine learning and deep learning to study ecology and evolution. And then our last speaker is Professor Aljan van Dijk, who is a scientist at Wageningen University, where he studies actually omics data, and he uses machine learning algorithms to gather information on multiple omics studies. I will introduce myself. So I'm Thomas. I'm one of the Plantae Fellows of this year. I'm a researcher at Ghent University, where I actually study hormone signaling in response to abiotic stress responses in Arabidopsis, the model species. Secondly, we have Kumanan. Kumanan is a PhD student at University of Malaya in Malaysia, where he is actually really focusing on using machine learning to find stress-responsive genes. And then our third moderator of the day is Ido, who is a lecturer at Bowen University, where she studies both biotic and abiotic stresses in legumes, and aside from that, she's interested in medicinal plant research. Okay, so before we go ahead with the panel discussion, which will take up the major part of today, I would like to just give a quick introduction to the topic and actually highlight a little bit why we are actually doing this webinar this year. So as you all know, for everyone is studying plant biology, biology in general is usually complex. It's always a complex puzzle to solve, and especially in plants, to what I encounter in my research is when you're studying at different levels, single cells or whole plants, and even plant ecosystems, is always very tricky. There is a lot of complexity in the mechanisms in the biological processes, but also there is a lot of variation in data, which we need to actually deal with. Also, if we're studying different processes, sometimes we are actually unaware of some of the mechanisms at play. So these things together actually are a problem. Well, not a problem, but are a challenge in plant science. And for that reason, especially in the last couple of years, well, last 10 to 20 years, the big idea is that we can actually collect a lot of data. Data can come from omics, metabolomics, transcriptomics, phenomics data. And with all these data, we can try to understand and uncover patterns and understand different processes. But of course, without any good tool to process the data and to recognize patterns in these data, we can become overwhelmed. So this is actually where AI comes into play. So I have a couple of definitions here to get everyone on the same page. I'm not going to go into detail, but what we are going to talk about today is mainly two types of artificial intelligence, which is machine learning and deep learning, which are a little bit different from one another, but often used in plant science. So machine learning is broadly a branch of AI in which statistical models and algorithms are able to recognize patterns in data, and actually it improves its performance over time through experience. That can be either by training, which is what we call so-called supervised algorithms, or can be unsupervised, which is basically by exploring relations between data. Deep learning, on the other hand, uses artificial neural networks to solve complex problems. So in plant science specifically, because that's why we're here today, there are a lot of applications, and I just give a couple of examples here. I'm not going over all of them because many of you, I think, know already what kind of applications there are. Can be applications that are really in the molecular part of plant science, that is trying to study omics data, transcriptomics, but also trying to uncover gene regulatory networks, etc. Then there is also a huge part of plant science that uses AI to do phenotyping, and specifically in precision agriculture, there is a huge amount of work that is using AI-based methodologies to do agriculture. And then, of course, we also have some applications in identification of species, in taxonomy, also in the detection of diseases, etc. So with all these applications, one can wonder, is it actually used a lot in our field in plant biology? And for the fun of it, I try to use AI to check which kind of publications are actually mentioning AI or any AI-based methodology in their abstract. So here, this is just a figure from Dimensions. It's an AI-based website in which you see the amount of papers mentioning these keywords. And you see biological sciences is quite high in the list. But if we look at plant biology, it's actually, there are more at the lower end. So the question that we had is, okay, is plant biology then lagging a little bit behind? Looking at these papers, you see that only from 2016, we see a huge surge in the publications, meaning that people are starting to use AI since the last couple of 8 years. So a good thing, there is people starting to use it and seeing that it's interesting to apply it in their work. So the question that we had for the webinar, and which many people probably will have, is, so if artificial intelligence can be used, is it something that we as plant scientists can add to our toolbox of things that we can do to study biological processes in plants? And I think useful, for sure, many people will agree with me that it is useful, and we can do a lot of things. But of course, it can be used and it needs to be used with keeping in mind what are the challenges on using AI in plant science. So there are different challenges ahead, which have to do with the type of data, with pitfalls in machine learning and deep learning methodologies that we would like to also touch a little bit upon in this webinar. And of course, we will also talk a little bit about what future perspectives that we will have for AI in the field. It can be in precision breeding or in decision-making in plant sciences. So with this, I would like to give the floor to Kumanan, who will start with our panel discussion of today's webinar. So you have the floor, Kumanan.
Thank you, Thomas. And thank you once again to all the audience for coming together to witness our experts sharing the convergence of machine learning and plant science, unraveling the future of innovation in just a click. So without further ado, I would like to go into the discussion. And my first question is to Dr. Sabina. So just to make sure the audience gets it right, how can you distinguish machine learning, deep learning, and artificial intelligence? And why do we use artificial intelligence and machine learning in plant science?
Right. Thank you very much, Kumanan, and hello to everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. So I guess the thing to keep in mind is artificial intelligence is a huge umbrella term that's used for all sorts of, to cover all sorts of different applications, technologies, and systems. And really, the broad definition is it's an ensemble of rule-based systems which specify procedures to carry out particular tasks, right? So they give you a way to actually do things step by step. This is really the broadest definition we can possibly give. And some people would say with this attempt also comes the attempt to imitate or sometimes even to replace human cognition. And I think this is actually not necessary to call something AI. This can be really very broad. It can include things like any rule-based system, expert systems, knowledge graphs. So the family of things that could be associated with AI is really quite vast. Now, not all AI tools are machine learning. Machine learning, in a sense, is a subcategory of AI. Something like a chat box is a good example of a rule-based system, which, however, is not machine learning. And again, broadly, machine learning is also a broad category, but these are computer systems, computational systems that are designed to learn from data, as we just heard. And they're designed to learn from data in ways that improves their performance over time. So a way maybe to think about this is there are ways to automate automation. So there are ways to actually assign to machines the very notion, the very procedures that we may use to automate our own tasks, so that we can, in fact, develop systems that start to work, at least to some extent, independently from human labor and human input. And when it comes to deep learning, of course, we have a system which some people actually would associate more strongly with machine learning, but which is based on an even deeper and study and consumption of large amounts of data.
Thank you, Safina. So, based on Professor Sabina's explanation, we understand that artificial intelligence or machine learning has the ability to automate human work. So, considering Dr. Mohsen's field-based research, so Dr. Mohsen, how would you describe an AI-powered system as a solution to monitor or improve agricultural productivity? Or are there anything being used at the moment?
Well, that's a great question. So first of all, hello everyone. I hope all are doing well, and thank you so much, Commander Thomas, Idaho and Jason for inviting me and organizing such this great, webinar. So basically, AI, or I would like to focus more on the machine learning, so the subset of the AI, because AI, as Sabina mentioned, is a very broad term. So machine learning can be best described as a tool to detect pattern or predict future, by using different data sets, like big data or metadata that we collected from different sources. So these two jobs, I mean detecting pattern and predicting future data, are actively used in agriculture. And these days we are using different data sets in agriculture to make our decision more accurate. So machine learning, or AI, machine learning right now play an important role in different agricultural areas, and it can be best described as a kind of system for precision farming or precision agriculture. So this involves using AI to analyze data that collected from different sources, like some sources like sensors, drones, satellites, proximal sensing, all those kind of data that we are collecting, we can use, and you can just feed AI to just make an informed decision about planting, fertilizing, and best irrigation time. And also we are able to predict crop yield at early growth stages, which I'm more, I've focused on, in my previous studies. So AI can analyze historical data, environmental data, or even, anthropogenic climate data, and make a prediction about potential crop yield, which allows farmers and also breeders to adjust their plans and goals and select superior lines. And in terms of detecting pattern, also, AI right now is actively used to detect pests and diseases, and it helps, pest and disease management. So from the pictures that we can take in a short time in the field, AI is able to just, diagnose some plant diseases accurately in a very short time, which was not possible, before doing manually, because it took so much time of us, and handling all those large data was not possible. But right now we are able to do that by using AI. And also in other terms, also AI is able to help us for optimizing the harvesting time, which is very important for farmers to just, pick the best harvesting time and ensure higher yield and better quality products. And AI also, it's not directly, help only help agriculture, but also it's able to help economy, agricultural economy by setting up market trends and pricing. So it can analyze, market trends, pricing data, and help farmers to make an informed decision about what to plant, what to sell, and at what price they can sell, their products. So as you also mentioned, Thomas, in your introduction, that AI is broadly using in agriculture, and those are some of the examples that I mentioned. But of course, AI right now actively used in different, fields of the agriculture. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mohsen. So for Dr. Alex, who's studying ecological, for using machine learning for ecology and conservation studies, so how is it different from what Mohsen shared?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of what Mohsen just shared, shows that AI can be used kind of in a whole host of different locations, different environments, different scientific laboratory field, just in silico on the computer, thinking about data. Conservation studies, I think, often focus on large taxonomic groups. So in some cases, AI is really useful to understand, different components of biodiversity. So one good example of that would be looking at leaf shape. Machine learning can be applied to generate kind of broad metrics of leaf shape diversity across, a large taxonomic group, many species, let's say. And those metrics then can be used to look at how, say, rare or threatened species might contribute to the broader patterns of leaf shape diversity across space. So this is pretty similar to how we use phylogenetic diversity to understand the kind of evolutionary distribution of species across the world and make conservation decisions based on those data. So artificial intelligence, I think, has obviously or machine learning specifically has a lot of applications in that framework, looking at many different species. Another powerful use of machine learning would be remote monitoring and assessments of environments using imagery. So satellite imagery is now really broadly available, much more so than it ever has been in the history of kind of remote sensing as a discipline. So it can be used to look at changes across space, evaluate phenological events, the turnover of species in the canopy across a specific geographic boundaries or environmental gradients. And especially just observing environmental features that change over time and space within enormous data sets that include essentially imagery of the environment, on the Earth's surface. So often, in the case of ecology and evolution, sorry, were you going to interrupt me?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, I was just going to say, I think AI can be used. It's different from what Motion shared, not just because they have a different purpose, but also because they're often deployed in very challenging conditions and locations. So I think in conservation, we're kind of thinking about that component in a big way.
Thank you, Dr. Alex. So moving to Dr. Altjan. So while Mohsin and Alexander is working in outdoor environment, Altjan's work is more of wet lab based with omics data. So Altjan, could you explain why AI and ML for molecular level studies and how AI or machine learning based methods are different or complementary to more classical approaches that are based on mechanistic models which are developed using biological knowledge and principles?
Yeah. Okay. Hi. Thanks. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this webinar. I will start then on this first question about how I think specifically machine learning is useful at the molecular and the omics level. So part of this is similar to what was mentioned already by some of the others, that you have these influx of large data sets, in our case, omics data sets, so sequencing, proteomics, and other omics data sets. And you want to make, or AI and specifically machine learning will enable you to make predictive models, find patterns in those data sets. Maybe one difference with some of the other work that was mentioned is that in our case, because we're closely connected to lab research, we would also be able to use our machine learning models to really steer new experiments. So if we make a predictive model and we can use the model to indicate some part of a molecule or some specific gene that could be targeted for further study, that can be very useful. And I think that has some implications for how we train the models or what kind of prediction performance we are interested in. So sometimes it's quite fine if the model is not able to predict with certainty that, okay, this or that gene is the one involved in a certain trait, but if in the top 10 prediction of the model, at least the right gene is in there, then that can be a really great help to our experimental colleagues who are fine with testing maybe tangents based on prediction of a machine learning model, but could not test all tens of thousands of genes that are present. So that's just to give a bit of background on how the specific setting that we work on has some implications for the use of machine learning. And then I think your other question was on how machine learning is different from more classical mechanistic models. So it's good to realize that these two modeling strategies are really complementary. So if you use mechanistic models, maybe you can write down a set of differential equations, for example. And that will allow you to really study your system in great detail, but you also need a lot of specific knowledge to make these kind of mechanistic models. So they're great, they really can help you to formalize a really detailed description of a system, but you also need to know already a lot to be able to do that. And the key difference with machine learning is that you could train a model in a situation that you don't know so much yet, but you have data. Of course, if you have biological knowledge, it's also good to think about how to combine that with training your machine learning model. But I think this is one key difference between these two modeling strategies.
Thank you for that explanation, Jan. So we have seen the use of machine learning models and AI applications in plant science. So we can move on to issues or points involved in model development. So this question is for Alex. So Alex, could you explain what are the critical steps in developing a model, and what are the requirements when proposing a model specific to a biological problem?
Okay, so you gave me the real hard one. I will allow my colleagues, obviously, any input here is welcome at the end of my answer. So I would say the first step, which is pretty much always the case with any scientific endeavor, is that you really need to define your scientific question explicitly. And I think that is really extra important in the case of using artificial intelligence. I think it's easy to feel like you just want to jump in and start tinkering with this method and seeing what it can do with data that you have. But I think it's much better to start from a position of asking a question that you have a very specific hypothesis that you are trying to test, and maybe devising your model approach around how that approach will help you better understand or evaluate that hypothesis. So, the answer that we just heard, we have mechanistic models and we can use artificial intelligence. One, I think, really important way to start would be asking whether or not some of those artificial intelligence models can help uncover some of, let's say, the kind of the truth of those mechanistic models in data that you have. From there, I would say, is machine learning or artificial intelligence actually required? And I think there's a trap. I think we'll get to this later on, but there's a bit of a trap, which is, is this the right way to start? Do I really need artificial intelligence, or is it just interesting and therefore, and exciting? But after you've decided that you want to build a model, probably from there, I would say, do you need to train a model? In which case you're looking at using a supervised model, or is there a model out there that's already been pre-trained, or are you kind of more interested in something that might use an unsupervised model, and therefore kind of more interested in patterns within your data that are based on some sort of mathematical framework that's embedded in an unsupervised approach? And the supervised approach is basically where I would say most people kind of end up. And what I almost always deal with at that point is people who want to apply a model to some data, but don't really even understand what the training data look like. So they might not have much training data. So the big question is, what is the data that I have that I could use to train a model? Or if I know I have a small amount of data, what is a model that looks like it's been trained with similar data? And so I think the training data really is just a core component of building any sort of artificial intelligence approach. So that's kind of where those are the pieces that I would put together before I really ever, start working on any machine learning component.
Thank you. That's very detailed. Anything to add on from others?
Now, maybe one general advice, which I think holds for making machine learning models, also for other types of models, is that it's always good to start small. So try to maybe make so your the initial version of your model does not have to deal with what you finally want to do. So it's always a good idea to try to keep it small at the beginning, so that you can really be sure about what you're doing.
Thank you, Achan. So moving on to the next question. This is for Dr. Marcel. So when it comes to field-based conditions, what have been the most reliable sources of data? And with the current sources of data, is it possible to develop models by integrating different types or modalities of data?
Oh, that's a challenging question. So basically, you ask difficult question, from Alex, and just asking me kind of challenging questions. So in agriculture, yeah, right now we can extract many features from different areas, as I mentioned before, to get a high resolution picture of how we can speed up the agricultural productivity. So in breeding that I'm right now working, and it's my job. So we are using data that collected from field manually. At the same time, we have data collected from drone or using high throughput phenotyping, or in general in phenomics, using genomics data, transcriptomics, other omics data. So our hand right now is open to select from different sources, but at the same time, some of them are more important in our our projects. For instance, in breeding, it's very essential to have the phenotypic information to make a decision. So so sometimes it doesn't hurt anyone that we do not have any transcriptomics data. It's better to have, but phenotypic is very important. So if I want to focus on phenotype, we can collect data manually using proximal sensing, drone-based data collection, and other sources. And the question that you ask, and I'm usually people asking me, is that what is the most reliable data sources, specifically for phenotype or other, omics that we want to use it? But it's challenging because we first need to define what does reliability mean, and what do you mean by reliable data sources? So basically, in statistics, reliability is the overall consistency of the measures. Or even, we would like to have, a kind of experiment that we can minimize the possible error, and maximize the accuracy, and produce similar results under consistent conditions. It's a kind of reliability. But if we want to focus only on machine learning algorithms or statistics, yeah, reliability defines correctly. But in terms of the agriculture, we need to modify this kind of reliability or those kind of terms. So for instance, in breeding, if we are working with a small plot, which we will have them at the advanced generations. So reliability exactly defined the same in statistics. We want to minimize error as much as possible, reproduce the data, and also maximize the accuracy. So we can just, the reliable source of data, because we are working with a small plot, can be measuring, data manually, or even, just having proximal sensing ground-based, measurement in terms of the phenotype, for instance, and we can increase, the accuracy. But when it comes to the F4 or early generation, that we are dealing with a large breeding population, so reliability there, in terms of the plant breeding, for instance, at the goal, it's changing a little bit. That here, of course, we are looking to have the maximum, accuracy, minimizing the error, but at the same time, reliability here is to have a stable equipment to take a measure and get best out of this large population as accurate as possible. So here, speed is very important. The price is very important. So many other things is important in reliability. So basically, in terms of the large population, for instance, we prefer to fly drone instead of just handling, manually. So being reliable, having a reliable source, I mean, it depends on every stage or even every trace that we are working with. Some traits like yield are controlled by so many factors, like environment, genetics, and interaction between of them. So reliability can be defined differently there. So, and in terms of gathering all those kind of sources of data, So now we have different options to integrate them. So we can use, different data integration strategies by using early integration, by having all of those different types of data together and make a prediction. And also we can use late integration by developing model based on each data set that we have, and then use the result of each model to build a comprehensive model as well, which I've done previously in using, I've done, I conducted a kind of hierarchical data integration as a part of the late integration strategies to just, using data collected from the phenomics, genomics, and put both together to predict some trait of interest in soybean. So, and I've suggested, to use late integration or intermediate integration or the late integration instead of the early one, because it's there. We are working with different types, different, nature of the data, but it depends on the choice of the researchers or the person who would like to integrate the data.
Thank you, Dr. Mohsen. Thank you. Thank you for emphasizing stability, consistency over reliability. That's very important. And moving to Altian, so since Mohsen talked about data integration, since you're dealing with multiple omics, so how do we transform this omics data into useful features or input for machine learning algorithms? And when we extract features from different types of data, for instance, proteomics or versus genomics, is it just a matter of putting together as much data as we can, or is there a specific way to frame the task?
Yeah, okay. I see that you decided to give me a slightly more easy question. Well, I don't know if that's true actually, but now I think the thing is that there's really many different ways, technically speaking, to transform your data to input for machine learning. Depends, of course, what type of data we're talking about. But one thing to mention is that this is also a field that's very much currently under active development. One specific development is the idea that if you have lots of data, for example, sequence data, you can first make representations of that data using unsupervised learning. So this is one of those two types of machine learning that were mentioned before. And using unsupervised learning, you can try and make already a good representation of your sequences, for example, or of protein structures or other things. And that can maybe help you to get started already with a useful representation of your data, even before to have a good representation, a good set of features at the start of a supervised approach. One other aspect here is that you also suggest a bit like, is it good to throw as much data as possible at the problem and combine everything you have? There I would say not necessarily, because of course it depends very much on the quality of the data and if the data is relevant for your specific problem. And I think this is sometimes a little bit a misunderstanding by some people, is that if your data is not related to what you want to predict, then you can have whatever fancy machine learning technique you want to try and use, but it will not be able to make a useful prediction. So you still need to think yourself, of course, what is useful data.
Okay, you still have time, and since you have mentioned that I've asked you an easy question, I'll give you go to the next level maybe. So continuing with you. So when we are using machine learning, for instance, to find a protein or gene that is associated with a specific trait, there are a few approaches to process the data to produce results. So for instance, there's like network-based ranking or scoring methods using machine learning to find or to generate a list of candidates based on its likelihood, right? So what is your take on this approach?
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, you are now focusing the question more specifically on one specific type of application where you try to find candidate genes for certain traits of interest, right? And you rank them in order to get useful information, maybe for your for follow-up experiments. So I would say one relevant point here is that yeah, this is, I think, related to what I said already before, is that in this case, often it's not needed that it's not so needed that the best that the top ranking prediction is also the one that you really that's really the correct one. If at least you manage to rank good, or one of the a good candidate in, say, a top 10, or depending on how much experience you can do, then that would be really useful. So this has some implications for how you analyze the performance of the method, because you really want to focus then on how well your method ranks. And another aspect of the question, maybe, because we were also talking about features and representations of input data. Of course, depending on what type of experiment you can do as a follow-up, you also want to make certain decisions on how you represent your input data. For example, in my case, when I work with protein sequences or protein structures, it makes a lot of sense that my colleagues maybe will do some mutation experiments to try out the effect of a specific mutation on protein function, for example. So that means that in my model, I also want to represent specific amino acids at certain positions in the sequence, so I can make a prediction of what happens if I change those in my model.
Thank you, Arsen. So moving on with Sabina, since everyone has spoke about the methods to evaluate the performance of machine learning, there's a lot of different methods to evaluate the performance and justify why the machine learning model or algorithm resulted in specific result. So there's a lot of heterogeneity present. So in your opinion, do you think this will hinder collaborations and progress in developing a practical solution?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it already has, in the sense that, there is a reason why I think we see maybe plant science being a little bit behind other parts of science, certainly biomedicine, in the application of AI methods, is partly because it is one of the most diverse and most heterogeneous domains, where almost every group have their own ways of carrying out experiments and their own ways of formatting data, their own ways of thinking about the assumptions that go into their work. And of course, there's very good reason for that, is because the ways in which we're working in plant science are exquisitely tailored to the specificity of the systems and the ecosystems and environmental conditions that we tend to work with. So of course, this creates questions when it comes to applying what can be a set of standardized tools, like in AI and algorithms, where you need to find a good compromise between wanting to tailor the system to the specificity of what you're looking at, but at the same time being able to kind of pick and choose different applications. And I think on top of the heterogeneity issue, there's also an issue that many people refer to as opacity in AI systems, the fact that very often, particularly for machine learning, you get to a situation as soon as your model is a bit more sophisticated, that is not entirely clear for a human how exactly a model gets to certain conclusions, which can be scary to many people. And again, with good reason, because sometimes we can't entirely make sense of what, in fact, is the reasoning behind getting to a certain set of results. So how does one then confront those issues of heterogeneity and opacity? First of all, being extremely careful, I think, especially in the plant science perspective, with the fact that AI can, in fact, be used very effectively to detect variation and to detect minute differences between systems. And I think some of the examples that already my colleagues have cited are very, very good examples of that. It's also true that AI algorithms and machine learning in particular have a tendency to smoothen out heterogeneity, right? Because what we're looking for here is patterns that actually bring things together. And so there's a sense in which the system is basically prompted to exclude what may look like outliers or non-standard input. And this is irrespectively of whether those are biologically meaningful. Right. So it's very important, I think it was Altian who was saying this before, start small and develop models where it's still possible to continuously triangulate between the quality of the training data that you're using to develop the model, the way in which algorithmic prediction is developing, and what kind of biological meaning is associated to the prediction, and whether somebody who is familiar with the biological systems that are looked at can actually make sense of those results and they sound like they in fact are familiar. I mean, even better, I think, very often, certainly for many students, to start by testing an algorithm on a situation where you already know what the result of your predictions may be. So you actually keep triangulating with things that you're familiar with. And also this really helps you with code development, and it helps you with reproducibility, which is a very important consideration here, because you want to end up with a system that in fact can be checked for being reproducible and can be applied in other contexts. So only once you've done that work, I would say, is worth starting to bringing in more sources, diverse data, apply the model so that it can be applied to a wider variety of questions, maybe, or different phenomena, or you can anyhow expand the scope. Because doing it sequentially like that, basically expanding the applicability, allows you to keep checking for biological meaning, to make sure that what you're getting out of this system, in fact, makes sense to you as the biologist in charge. So in that sense, I think maybe that's what Alex was saying, what he was saying. Very often people end up doing supervised modeling or semi-supervised, because very often, certainly now that we're still in many ways at the start of using these tools in plant science, it keeps being important checking that we're not squishing out heterogeneity that actually is really important to our work.
Just to follow up, since you have said that merging or introducing machine learning for plant science is still relatively new at this juncture, how can a plant scientist distinguish a good study from a bad one? I think this is very important to make progress in this field.
Yeah, so I would say, background biological knowledge continues to be really important in assessing whether you think the results are plausible. But of course, another criterion, if you're trying to look at areas that you're not very familiar with, or trying to see whether a model developed on a species that you're not familiar with at all may be useful for yours, is to look at the comprehensiveness of the materials that people who are publishing papers and code in this area are making available. So seeing how the training data are presented, are papers, supplementary materials actually making available enough information about how the training data were selected in the first place and how they were, in a sense, delimited. Is there a clear sense from the methods of how the code was developed? Is there a proper analysis of the assumptions? And by this, I mean biological assumptions that were used and inputted into the system while developing the model. These are all very important parameters. And while it looks like it may be obvious, I've seen lots of studies where this is not clear at all. Actually, people are rushing through trying to publish their model, and they're not making those passages as clear as they should be. Another question, of course, is often things like the provenance of data, but also the provenance of the coding and the programming. Very often now we find situations, which I think is great, where people keep repurposing data acquired by others, or keep repurposing code that comes from different projects, which is fantastic. Is the modular nature of this is exactly one of the great strengths of using AI. But it's very important to keep tracking what comes from where, because each of those technologies and tools will be developed for particular purposes. And very often, assumptions are inputted into these systems which relate to the original purpose. So as long as we have a sense of the history of the development of a certain tool, then I think it's much easier for people to evaluate that and think, okay, so given these assumptions, given these goals, what do I need to look out for here that may be less relevant to me or more relevant to me? If you're lacking that information, then evaluating the quality of a model becomes very difficult, unless you're just using it to check results that you already have.
Thank you so much for that, Sabina. So now I would like to pass the floor to Idowu for Q&A. I've received a lot of questions from the audience. So Idowu, please.
Thank you again to our speaker and to Kumanan, the moderator. So we have a lot of questions, but apologies if we won't be asking your question. So my first question from the audience will be directed to Bondik. Which prominent AI software is used for information about plant sciences? And is there any recommended software? So Bondik, please.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a big question. So if the question is like, is there any specific software that I can use to do AI on plant science? I think, at least for me to answer, the question is a bit too broad. I would say that it really depends on what kind of problem you want to deal with. So I find this a very difficult question. I mean, there are many different ways of doing AI or machine learning, but I don't know. Maybe one of my colleagues has another suggestion here.
Okay, Mohsen, would you like to make a comment on that, please?
Oh yeah, so building what Aljan Van Dijk provided. So mentioned, there is no specific. The question is so broad and it's so wide, so you cannot just point out to a specific software or anything to just coding artificial intelligence, but it depends on what type of goal and research you would like to do with artificial intelligence. For instance, if you want to just detect pattern or using images, so I personally prefer to use Python for that. But if it's a kind of regression and I would like to I just wanted to do some regression and make a prediction, for instance, for the crop yield or those kind of traits that we are working with, I prefer to use Carrot package, or even recently the tidy model, if I'm not mistaken, in R. Or even if I just wanted to, make life easy for me and don't coding, nothing, do nothing, but just see what will happen and have a chance to work with a broad range of, algorithms, I prefer to use Weka software. So it depends, but it's so broad, the question, but it depends on the choice of, the goal, the research, or whatever you want to do.
Thank you, Mohsen and Van Dijk. So the next question, I would direct it to Alex, and it's a two question in one. Well, one of the question asked by the viewer is that a lot of backlash has been towards AI system that is going to steal our job as a plant scientist. So I guess the person is a graduate student with interest in AI. So how do you propose its application in a professional, effective manner? Further, how can I potentially convince individuals like this to utilize MLDL model? And the second one, what would be the career prospects if we specialize in AI in plant science? Alex, please.
Well, yeah, I understand maybe where that concern comes from, but I actually think that we have it's quite the opposite in my point of view. The only way we can really do the science is with the approach where we are kind of picking and choosing what type of models to apply to the data that we have, whether those models are appropriate, whether they reveal anything significant about biology that we're interested in studying. So right now, to me, it does not appear like artificial intelligence will somehow kind of supersede us as scientists. It seems the opposite. It's kind of an incredibly powerful tool that will allow us as scientists to gain insights and look deeper into patterns that we otherwise had almost no ability to kind of assess or evaluate with the tools that we had previously to kind of artificial or machine learning and deep learning basically being the kind of core toolkit. And I guess the second question was, what are the career prospects of developing those skills? And I think they're incredibly strong. So the first thing I'd say is, it's clear to me that in the sciences and broadly outside of the hard sciences, artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, these are all becoming really kind of pieces of our lives. And the extent to which we become experts at understanding how they work and how they can be applied to the challenges that will kind of remain even in their presence, I think that's a powerful way to sell your skill set and to hopefully pursue a career. So I think it's not as much of a terrifying thing as it might seem that it's going to somehow kind of supersede the science.
Thank you, Alex. Let me also ask this question from Alex before moving to Sabina. Okay. taking a reliable data source regarding digitization of specimen, various specimen, what type of camera will you advise or suggest? Is a perspectral cameras necessary? Briefly, please, for Alex.
Yeah, well, I suppose that it's especially that really has to do with what type of question you're trying to answer. Are the data coming from a hyperspectral camera the type of data you want to use in a machine learning model? In that case, I think, yeah, it's probably, required. There are many ways to take an image, to digitize any herbarium specimen, any pollen slide, any microscope slide. There's just so many ways to approach the question. I think you have to be thinking, what are the data that are generated from that tool, and how are those data part of the pipeline that I want to use with machine learning?
Okay, thank you. So a question for Sabina. Machine learning heavily rely on data. So can you make a comment on data quality and data sharing, how we can speed it up in real application beyond proof of concept or research stage?
To be honest, my answer to this briefly would be that we can't speed it up too much in the sense that data really just needs to be checked. And there's lots of studies, of course, and lots of work done on data quality checks and how we do referee data. And the answer continues to be really that aside from some basic checks of validity, the answer really is checking data in a qualitative sense. You need to actually see that the data makes sense given the methodologies you've used, given the system you're dealing with, given the conditions under which you're carrying out whatever experiment, measurement, or observation you're making. So this is not necessarily fast work, but it's absolutely crucial work, because without having reliable data, we're basically building a whole ecosystem of data resources and AI that could potentially become very unreliable very quickly. I would add also another very important consideration for anybody who wants to use AI tools is not just a question of evaluating the quality of the data at a certain moment in time. It's also very important to keep thinking about how legacy data actually retain, if they do, quality over time. Because, for instance, an experiment carried out 10, 15 years ago, it will be done with very different technologies from what we would be using now, and maybe different parameters, different tools. And so one has to really consider whether data that's been picked up, generated 10, 15, 20 years ago is still compatible and comparable, commensurable with the kind of data that we're using now and producing now, and in which ways do we facilitate that? This is all possible, but it does require, certainly still now, a lot of thinking and a lot of human intervention to be able to construct a system that is appropriately calibrated. Of course, there's also ethical and kind of questions around the sensitivity of some of this data that I think are also important to their quality. But that maybe is a too long a discussion for now.
Oh, thank you, Sabina. So this question to Von Dijk: how long does it take to develop a tailored ML AI for specific use? Is it possible to develop the method and use to analyze data within 3 to 4 years? And can you give some efficient common method to efficiently deal with feature evaluation and selection for machine learning-based prediction? Thank you.
So if I understood correctly, the question mentioned a time frame of 4 years, which makes me think it's maybe asked by someone, for example, at the beginning of a PhD project. If you have, I think if you have a couple of years, you can definitely train the model. I would say it can be done faster even, but don't expect to do this in 4 days or 4 weeks. I mean, that would be impossible. But again, it depends very much on what you want to do. You need to start with, as was mentioned before, the quality of your input data. You need to define your research question. The problem often is not so much the training time itself. It's the time that the computer has to run. This will maybe also take some time if your model is big, but it's much more the time that you need to think on what really is your question, and then to follow this procedure that was mentioned before, where you start small, you gradually compare your initial model with with some things that you really know, and so you can really be sure about the quality of your model, and you gradually build on this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And to Mohsen, I have quite some question regarding the use of algorithm. Is it possible to combine multiple algorithms to mitigate their weaknesses? What if there is? Do you have any recommendation? And also to Mohsen again, is it very common for farmers in developed countries to use AI in their farming? If you have any examples, you can please give to us. Thank you. To Mohsen.
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions. So those are very great questions. So basically, the first one, if I understand correctly, it's combine, multiple algorithms together, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so actually, is it possible? Yeah, is it possible to combine multiple algorithms, multiple classifiers together? But it depends on the nature of your data. It depends on the goal and whatever you want to do in your research. So basically, sometimes, yeah, we decided to just, merge different types of, algorithms together as an ensemble. We call it ensemble algorithms. We have different types of ensemble, like the bagging, boosting, stacking, loading. We have different types of ensemble algorithms, and we can merge, use different, combine different types of algorithms together in order to eliminate their weaknesses and, emphasize on their strength. But at the same time, we need to be careful about, the overfitting and all those kind of things that we are facing with, because sometimes the best, those high numbers that we are receiving are not exactly the best, results. So we have to be careful about the type of algorithms that we are going to select. And so, these type of questions, I can just talk, answer this type of question for a day, because it's so broad and it's required to specific examples. But at the same time, sometimes I'm seeing that people are using multiple algorithms and try to pick one algorithm from each classifier, like decision trees, support vectors, neural networks, and then just compare all those efficiencies and see which one is better, or even mix all those kind of classifiers together. It's good, but at the same time, it depends on the type of the works that we are working. If our goal is to improve and develop new algorithms, or even find something in the algorithms, yes, is right. But sometimes we know our data set that it's not good for a specific classifiers, but we want to make an ensemble one. So we need to know our data set first, and the goal and the types of the research that we are doing. And the second one is, if I'm not mistaken, is about the use of AI for farming. Yeah, right?
Yes.
So, basically, it's not directly, I'm seeing here in Canada that right now, there are some apps that take, disease and pests, and farmers are actively using them. So they just, take a picture of the leaf, and these apps are trying to predict that what is the possible disease or deficiencies that this farm has. So basically, it's gradually being used by farmers, and also it's directly using by farmers. But in terms of indirectly used by farmers, yes, there are so many instances, like the one that I mentioned about checking the price and those kind of harvesting time, those kind of planting time in terms of the weather condition and everything, make a prediction and let provide a kind of recommendation to farmers that what would be the best time for planting and harvesting, and what would be the best price at what range. So these are kind of recommendations that's usually provided by the governments, or even some industries, local industries, or the local organization to the farmers.
Okay.
But at the same time, also using by some sort of things are using by farmers directly as well.
So thank you very much for the answers. And this is the end of the webinar. I want to appreciate the speakers and also the audience. We thank you for being part of this webinar. And if you still have any more questions, you can just go to the social media handle of any of the speakers, and I'm sure you will have answers to your question. So thank you all. Sabina, thank you. Alex, thank you. Bondik and Mohsen, we appreciate you agreeing to join us in this webinar. And thank you to my moderators, my fellow moderators, Thomas and Kumanan. So thank you all.
Yes, yeah. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Again,
Goodbye.
this webinar has been recorded and you can watch it at your leisure. And so I know we've covered a lot of ground. And so you're more than welcome to rewatch and reshare the content. And again, thank you and have a great weekend, everyone. See you in the
Thank
next
you
one.
all. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.